Yes, the litho of the 1856 caning of Charles Sumner by Preston Brooks, a Democrat from South Carolina, who was a House of Representative member, but Sumner was a member of the Senate, got caned by Brooks while he was working at his desk just because he'd made a tough anti-slavery speech. A sort of cold opening for Media Watch, and there will be another historical progression of some of the roots of these anti-equality, white supremacist movements in. Yeah, that's the Michael Beschloss Twitter feed, the tweet that he posted a couple days ago of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, marching up Pennsylvania Avenue in 1925 to show their power in American politics during the early to mid 20s. And that basically is what we're going to get into in this issue of Media Watch. Welcome again, folks. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And brought to you by the good graces of Manhattan Neighborhood Network and EVT Educational Productions. And Bob, we're pre-taping the Thursday before it airs on Monday, but it's a few days, actually almost a week after the Charlottesville violence that killed one anti-white supremacist protester.
Sure.
A young lady whose life cut short. She hadn't even reached her 30th birthday, to my knowledge.
But it was good for you to open with that historical perspective, though. I mean, this, of course, Charlottesville was just a week ago, but this type of violence against people with different opinions who go against people who are pro-equality, who want to try to bring the nation together. Then you showed the tweet of the KKK March in 1925, right down Pennsylvania Avenue, right with the hoods and everything. So starting with that, you have a base for what we're seeing today. It's a fresh wound in some bleeding that's gone on in America for a while. So it's a fresh wound. Yeah.
Good, because the death of that young lady is fresh in our minds, and her mother's tribute to her daughter is just amazing. I want to get back to that.
Sure.
But I want to get to that streak that's in American history, that's an actual living, usually tamped down, forced into the background strain that's people keep saying is not reflective of who we are as a nation. Unfortunately, folk, what I have to say is historically, that is who we are as a nation. Folk don't want to go there because they have to go back to the roots of this country, which is actually in slavery. And because all 13 colonies practice slavery, when you try to abolish slavery, which not everyone in the 19th century thought should be abolished.
Correct.
But there were enough people from the earliest days, including the Quakers and many others, who said this is an abomination to man and God,
right,
and should not be practiced by right-thinking people in this country. Then that's the history that today's white supremacists and their movement is actually founded on. Those folks who practiced slavery wanted to keep slavery in force.
They wanted to keep the secondary class, whatever it would be, whether it be African Americans or some other class of people. They were first, and they were going to keep down whoever wasn't part of their class.
Not just they. These are white people, Caucasian in nature,
right,
who practiced slavery. Specifically, who wanted to keep black people and the Native Americans in a status of enslavement and or non-citizenry, okay?
Right.
And that first litho that we saw, the caning of Charles Sumner by Preston Brooks, who was in the House of Representatives. Sumner was a senator. And in 1856, because of what was going on in the western part of the country, they were debating whether to have free states or slave states as the country expanded westward. Quick history lesson, they decided they would have suffrage of the local population by vote. They'd decide whether they'd be slave or they'd be free.
Right.
And so Kansas, which was the territory that was vying to become a state, had the plebiscite that was supposed to be voting to be free or slave. And in the height of that debate and that vote, there was voter fraud, etc. But border, quote, ruffians from Missouri, pro-slavery, came raiding across the border, and they burnt Lawrence, Kansas, and attacked the free soil, free state individuals.
Right.
And so Charles Sumner got up in the Senate and spoke at length. There are accounts that said he may have spoken for 2 days. He called the abomination of slavery what it was, and he alluded to the fact that Senator Butler, a Southern senator, had made an alliance or had taken a mistress, the harlot of slavery.
Right.
And
he put it in very colorful and eloquent terms. I mean, it was very insulting, but it was meant to be.
It was quite insulting, and in some quarters it was quite incendiary.
Yes.
And because this particular person, Butler, was a cousin, I take it back, Brooks, Preston Brooks was a cousin of Butler who had been insulted by Sumner, he took it upon himself to chastise Charles Sumner in a physical way with a cane. And that litho that you saw was him beating Charles Sumner almost to unconsciousness. I think he broke the cane. He may have broken 2 canes. We'd have to double check that. But that was a flashpoint that electrified the entire country, and it basically took the battle for freedom of all people or continuation of slavery as the Southern power, the slave power that Sumner was railing against in the Senate, because there was a block of senators from the South who maintained that we were never getting rid of slavery and all those new states would become slave states. And Sumner was against that, and he fought them tooth and nail. His speech insulted this guy. He got caned almost to death for it. And that's the 1850s polarization that we are seeing in 2017 being relived.
Now, I just want to point out, that was 1856, correct?
Correct.
And the end of the Civil War is, 1865. So we're talking about a 9-year period. Okay, let me compare that from the beginning of the Barack Obama administration to right now. Okay, that's also 9 years.
9-year period.
So in 9 years, we went from that fight on the floor of the Senate to a war to the end of the war, all in the 9-year package from that flaming point to, hundreds of thousands of people getting killed over it, to the end of the war, to what was supposed to be Reconstruction, but wasn't, as reconstructive as anybody would have liked. So that's, we can't equate today to that explosion, but that's how quickly it happened. I just wanted to make that point, how quickly the nation changed from that point to war to...
A lot of historians say that the Sumner caning was one of the earliest triggers that sent the country down the road to civil war.
Right.
Now, because it was a reflection of the bleeding Kansas, bloody Kansas battle about free state or slave state, where they were actually shooting and killing each other. Folks, here's the basis for the discussion. The border raiders coming over were killing people willy-nilly. The other side decided we're going to kill too. John Brown actually went out there, raised a whole series of people, and they raided back across the people, and they started killing folks as well. So when you're talking about today's white supremacists saying, we're ready to kill these people, I forget, there was some quote where he says, we're ready to kill these people. What a lot of people are now saying, that this country has gotten as polarized in 2017, where they're now talking about violence as the answer to what normally would be a senatorial debate in Congress.
Exactly.
And that's the bulk of the editorials back in 1856 was what normally should be discourse has brought the barbarians and the barbarity of the fight against freedom and slavery onto the Senate chamber.
Right.
And so the people who were shooting and killing led to post-Civil War Reconstruction. Let's give the freed slaves, the right to vote.
Right.
And the anti-side to that was, let us not. As a matter of fact, we will terrorize you back into submission.
Absolutely.
And the growth of the Klan
Right.
and the Knights of the White Camelia came right out of the end of Civil
Absolutely.
War, when the anti-slavery people were trying to make citizens of the freed blacks. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed against a lot of Southern blocs. And in order to, again, repress and suppress this new population, organizations like the Klan and the Knights of the White Camelia came into being and did exactly what people and pundits have been saying for the last 4 days. They began to terrorize people of color, black people, in their homes.
But in order to do that, they had to make themselves, they had to blend into the community. Well, they were the community. They
were the community.
I mean, so they weren't hiding at that point. They weren't the least bit latent. They were there doing the harassing, the killing. And
yes, but you know what? Because there was a Reconstruction government with federal officers patrolling and trying to protect those newly freed Africans, they started putting on sheets so nobody could recognize them.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yes.
And so they donned these supposed scary ghost costumes to not only hide their faces, but to, quote, terrorize these very supposedly fearful Negroes. And so that's why the mask came into being and why the white sheets came into being. But now that we've seen the way things have changed, let's pick up on that. The whites and the sheets and whatever. Your quick research on the 1925, when the Klan got resurgent. They got resurgent in two ways. Woodrow Wilson, president, decided he would screen Birth of the Nation at the White House.
I was going to bring that up if you
Go
did.
to it.
No,
Go to it.
If you didn't.
No, I'm tired of talking. Talk about that.
Well, I mean, I'm an old movie buff. So, I mean, years ago when I first saw Birth of the Nation, I was watching it for the tech side because it was one of the breakthroughs in the movie industry. The choreography,
camera stuff, and
Yes.
all this stuff. What a great breakthrough technologically.
Right.
The modern movie.
Right. But then when I saw it through the first time, I realized the central message was the glory of the KKK.
That's it.
And I remember there's a special line in that movie. It was something like 100,000 people and not a single trust broken. In other words, no one ever ratted on another KKK member.
They stayed under their hoods.
Right. I mean, that was a highlight of the movie, that one statement. And at various points in the movie, of course, you see black people being chased back into their homes. You can see them peeking out of their doorways. They see the Klan
cowering in fear.
Fear from the Klan on horseback. And that's the type of movie that the president,
Woodrow Wilson,
decided
he needed to have a premiere in the White House. Okay? And so that was like 1917, 1915.
In that era,
15 was when the film came out, so I believe Wilson was in office.
And it was also premiered here in New York City to Cheers in Times Square.
Guess what? As you go to your 1925 Best Loss, pick up on that, because there is a nice progression about the 1920s Klan and the fact that the Klan weren't just in the South. Actually, they were formed in Indiana, folks, in case you didn't know. We've discussed that on Media Wash in the past. They weren't formed in the Deep South. They were formed in Indiana.
I mean,
the Beschloss tweet in the 1925 March up Pennsylvania Avenue was the Klan that had become resurgent after Birth of a Nation got that imprimatur from the President of the United States, and was cheered in theaters across the country.
And there were no issues about getting the permit for that event.
That's right.
None at all.
They had been somewhat dormant. They got huge growth in between the late teens and 1925 when they marched up Pennsylvania Avenue. And they did it more than once, but that one was significant. I believe they had maybe 20,000 strong or something to that effect.
Something like 25,
yeah,
but yes.
Yeah, but now the Klan was so powerful that I think one of the stories you were referring to was Rachel Maddow's step-by-step takedown on the Democratic Convention.
She did an excellent review a few days ago, Rachel Maddow, of course, on
MSNBC, right.
And she went into the 1924 Democratic Convention, which was held right here at the old Madison Square Garden, actually not far from where we are right now.
Right.
And she went back into it took 16 days for that convention, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The key candidates were New York State Governor Al Smith. And the other one was a person we probably haven't heard of since then, a man named William Gibbs McAdoo.
McAdoo, right.
Okay.
McAdoo. Now, the key thing that is crucial for why Al Smith was anathema to the Klan was because Al Smith was a Roman Catholic.
Yes.
And guess what?
That's one
the Klan didn't like blacks, they didn't like Jews, and they didn't like Roman Catholics.
Exactly.
A lot of Catholics forget that today. Okay? So a lot of Catholics tend to side with Donald Trump and his right-wing leaning folk.
It's astounding how people don't remember that type of history.
They don't know history.
Right.
They don't know. Half of them don't even understand what the Klan and the Knights of the White Camelia stood for, and that was basically killing, torturing, terrorizing black people to make sure they couldn't exercise their rights as citizens, trying to make sure they couldn't even become citizens.
Right.
So that basically is the root. I don't know, you might want to talk about the New York State connection and the early Klan connection to the Trump family, because we talked about it on Media Watch once before.
I mean, just going back to the convention, they never did get a candidate out of the convention. Neither Al Smith or Mr. McAdoo got the nomination.
That's right. The Klan waxed so powerful that the other half of that Democratic Party could not defeat them in getting Al Smith through.
Right. And there were a number of protests. There were a number of marches by the Klan at that time in this vicinity, including one in New Jersey and one in Queens.
Big rally in Jersey, thousands.
Yes.
The one in Queens, maybe 1,200.
Yeah,
maybe
a bit of a
more,
dust up, but it was a bit of a dust up. And Rachel did a cool thing. She called up the old New York Times report, and apparently a few people got arrested that day.
A couple of people who were attacking the, what did they call them? The bullying Catholic New York Police Department.
Yes,
something to that effect.
Yeah, no, the word Catholic was thrown in there like
it was like the police department are Catholics.
Right.
And they are beating up on us nice Klan-sympathizer citizenry.
Right, and the word Catholic was used as a pejorative. It was used as an insult.
Oh, definitely.
But one of those people, and she actually looked up the arrest record and found that too, little handwritten arrest record. One of the people arrested was Fred Trump.
And guess who Fred Trump is, folks?
Yes.
In case you don't remember when we talked about it on Media Watch back about a year and a half ago.
You had actually brought it up on this show.
We did.
Yes.
And Fred Trump was none other than the father of your current occupant of the White House.
Exactly.
Donald J. Trump.
Yes.
So the fact that the father was a sympathizer and marcher with the Klan sympathizers in the 1920s should give you some idea of why the son is so reluctant to call out the Klan and the white supremacists in 2017. Now, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
But it's interesting. Even Rachel Maddow gave him rope. She said, "Well, the son doesn't inherit all of the sins of the father, but you can't ignore this.
Actions speak louder than words."
Right. You can't ignore this history.
And his action in not condemning, or should I say, the lack of action in not condemning the white supremacists and the Klan sympathizers and his action in taking back his second attempt to clean up his act.
Yes.
Because he did claim it was both sides, violence on both sides, blame on both sides, on all sides, the initial quote. Blame on all sides.
Was all sides.
And then they reel him in, and he goes to the podium on Monday, this past Monday, when we aired, so a week ago Monday, and said, well, yes, I condemn all these groups, the KKK, the white supremacists, et cetera, and you can see he's ready to puke all over himself trying to say those words. But he said them.
Yes, he did.
And everybody thought, oh, okay, we can let it slide until his infrastructure press conference the next day.
Yes. Yeah, he went off the road. Went off the script on that one again. And
okay, so let's talk about that. The White House people kept putting out the story that Donald Trump went off script and went rogue. He went rogue on us, and he was supposed to talk about infrastructure, and that's what we expected. And he brought out Elaine Chao, and he brought out Steve Mnuchin. He brought out all these cabinet people to talk about infrastructure, and his chief of staff was standing off to the side waiting for him to talk that. And then the first question wasn't about infrastructure; it was about Charlottesville, and he said, "You fake news people," or whatever the quote was. Y'all always tell it the wrong way. I happen to have what I said on Saturday, and trust me, you don't happen to have what you say unless you plan to go out there and talk about what you said on Saturday. Otherwise, you wouldn't have it with you. But so the fact that they think he did that unscripted,
right,
I find not readily believable, not credible, because with not just after the first question, practically before the question was out, I got my quote.
Right.
It's right here. He planned to go down that road.
He did, and it's funny that he's the loose cannon of his administration.
That's correct.
I mean, he doesn't have a loose cannon. He is the loose cannon, and everyone is always his cabinet, his advisors, if he has any. Because he doesn't take any advice.
He sure doesn't.
And he does what he wants as he wants it, without much research and with total ego. Not willing to take any criticism and ready to insult anyone. He laid it on to John McCain again a few days ago. He laid it on to a few people he didn't agree with in a few tweets this morning. So we have a president who's not the person actually you want delivering the American message when we have an issue like this. You'd actually rather hear from a spokesman who can actually get the point across smoother.
The bringing together of the country, which basically is one of the key mandates of anybody in the Oval Office, and he claimed he could bring people together much better than Barack Obama did. That was one of his quotes, if I remember correctly.
He even said that he could help blacks.
Oh yeah. Now, he came down the escalator insulting Mexicans throughout his campaign. He was calling people all kinds of racist, bigoted names. And because of that, the white supremacists were emboldened and basically said, we've got a guy who thinks like us in office. We're happy that he's on this cycle. And once he got elected, they got even more emboldened. I think the Southern Poverty Law Center put out a report claiming that at least 100 more white supremacist groups got instigated and formed since his election.
Right. They got a new sense of energy, and because they knew the support was there, and they knew that the.
So he claims he's not racist. He claims he's not bigoted. However, the Thursday afternoon tweet, because as I was looking up the stuff on 1856, because it's not in the top of my brain like it used to be when we did Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home, but I came across an afternoon tweet that said he tweeted another anti-Muslim quote because he was equating terrorists with Muslims, and the quote was, I want you all to go back and look at what Patton did to those Muslim terrorists back in 1905 or whatever, and just look it up.
Right.
Now, of course, he was referring to his other campaign thing about Patton getting 50 rifles and 50 riflemen and 50 bullets and dipping it in a pig's blood and then shooting 49 of these terrorists, Muslim terrorists, and then sending the 50th one and saying, now go tell your people what happened.
Right.
Well, it turns out that's a bogus story. It didn't happen. But he retweeted it again Thursday before we're airing on Monday. So this guy just can't help going down the racial, racist Alice in Wonderland hole. He can't help himself. I don't know how much time we have.
We have about 3 minutes. And do you mind if I quote from my friend Harvey Briggs?
Yeah, do some stuff on Harry, and we can pay tribute to the young lady's mother.
Yeah, I'll do this very quickly. Harvey Briggs is he's an automotive writer. He's a friend of mine, but he's also a member of the Briggs family, which used to own the Detroit Tigers, Briggs Stadium, and all of that. They were responsible for a lot of the parts that went into Hudson cars, Ford cars. It was a big company. He did a lot for America. But my friend Harvey, he says that although long removed from prominence, he wears the name of Briggs proudly. But for all of the things, and I'll just read it, and for all he accomplished, for all the good he did for the city of Detroit, the community, and our country, I cannot overlook one fact. He was racist. And he did a lot of things. He tried to keep blacks off of the Detroit Tigers. His nickname was No Nig Briggs. And this is my heritage. This is my legacy. Well, I reverse that. This is my legacy. This is my heritage. This is why I can't coddle a president who ignores the truth and doesn't have the moral compass to know that all Nazis are evil. So I'll leave it at that since we're running out of time.
Phenomenal. The young lady who lost her life in Charlottesville, her name is Heather Heyer. Her mother paid tribute to her, and I hope we have enough time to call up the quote. They tried to kill my child to shut her up. Well, guess what? You just magnified her. She said that, and then she said one other thing that I'd rather have my child. This is what she said on that podium. But by golly, if I've got to give her up, we're going to make it count. I got to tell you, I could not get over her fortitude and her sense of pride and the child that she raised. If we do nothing but fight for that child's memory against all these Nazis, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, that's one thing we need to make sure we take on as a goal, as a people.
Agreed.
Forget the guy in the White House.
Yes.
Because he's now being called the leader of the neo-Nazis. I mean, I'm not making this up. A bunch of tweets went out from a whole bunch of folk and a bunch of columns being written. He is now the de facto leader. Your president, the guy in the White House, is now the de facto leader of the neo-Nazis.
15 seconds.
This has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And we'll catch you the next time. Catch us on YouTube.
On Media Watch EVT.